Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about evolving from traditional business intelligence to modern business analytics. The original TDWI Best Practices Report, which is the focus of this webinar, was sponsored by Elation, Denoto, and Win Enterprise by Grape City. We'll hear today from the report's author, Dave Stodder with TDWI. But before I turn over the time to Dave, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of his presentation, Dave will host a question and answer period. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question and send it over. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, check the Help area located below the slide window, and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's event, and we'll be emailing you a link to the archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or share it with a colleague. Our speaker today is David Stodder, Senior Director of Research for Business Intelligence at TDWI. As an analyst, writer, and researcher, Dave has provided thought leadership on key topics in BI, analytics, IT, and information management for over 2 decades. Previously, he headed up his own independent firm and served as Vice President and Research Director with Ventana Research. He was the founding Chief Editor of Intelligent Enterprise, a major publication and media site dedicated to the BI and data warehousing community, and served as Editorial Director there for 9 years. With TDWI Research, Dave focuses on providing research-based insight and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, performance management, and related technologies and methods. David, I'll turn things over to you here.
Jim, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for this webinar. It is the culmination of a major project that I've been involved with, and at the top I want to thank Jim for his work on this report, as well as the other members of the production team, Lindsay Stairs, Rich Seeley, and Rod Gosser. We all worked very hard on this to produce the research and get it into publication. So today is the webinar, so it's a day of some celebration. So let me start with my agenda, and I'll just keep it brief here just because I've got a lot to cover. So I'll just open with some details about the report and about the topic, and then provide research insights. I cover a lot of topics today, so just at the top I wanted to talk about data literacy. We'll get to that. And then talk about technology selection, funding, and management, because I think as we talk about how it's evolving from BI to business analytics, it's important to talk about that as how that process is working. Analytics uses patterns and satisfaction, talk about that. Data integration, data catalogs, because obviously this all goes together. The whole data integration and data management stack is critical to business analytics. And then governance and trust, which are very important to going forward with business analytics and organizations. Close with some recommendations, and then we'll go into audience Q&A. We do have a couple poll questions along the way to get our audience feedback as we're proceeding. So just to talk a little bit about the research reports, if you're not familiar with them, my colleagues Fern Halper, Philip Russum, and I produce reports every year that are really our extensive research reports about various topics. And so the purpose is to educate technical and business professionals about new technologies, concepts, and best practices, how these are all coming together. We do a big survey in the report, so I'll certainly be quoting an awful lot of survey data in here, so we can really feed back to our TDWI community what's going on, so organizations can see what their peer organizations are doing, kind of get a sense of where they are, how their kind of goals match with other organizations' goals. So the survey, and I want to also thank everyone who participated in the survey. It's just so valuable to be able to pull all the input together and provide this research. So thank you very much for participating. Business and IT pros with focus on lots of different topics: data architecture, data integration management, analytics certainly for this report, business intelligence for this report, and lots of other things too. The research does include interviews with user organizations and technology experts along the way. So some of the reports we've done, Philip just published a report, Data Management for Advanced Analytics, so that's out there and you can access that on the TDWI website. Faster Insights from Faster Data was the one I wrote that we published earlier this year, the Q1 2020 report, so that's out there too. Bern Halper, Driving Digital Transformation Using AI and Machine Learning, and we've covered cloud management and lots of other topics. So please head up to our website and take a look at these. Now, the research methodology and demographics for this report, so it mostly took place in the research survey that is in July of 2020. We sent email invitations out to our community, got 249 total responses. And with a survey like this, all the responses are valuable. So certainly we really appreciate everyone who did every single question. So thank you very much for that. But we looked at the survey results closely and made sure that the results were valid and so forth. So we had to kind of winnow it down to the 249. But I think that we've got a really good sampling here. So survey demographics, 3 in 10 respondents are IT, business or IT executives. So we have executive level, both business and IT level at 30%. Second largest group was business analysts, data scientists, 24%. Then we had developers, data application enterprise architects at 22%. We did have pretty good business side response, line of business and business sponsors, that's 9%, and then other IT titles and just sort of all kinds of other things, 15%. In terms of geography, it is largely the U.S., 59%, but we had good representation from around the world, Canada 10%, Europe 10%, and so forth. And the size of organizations, 10 billion or more, accounted for 14%. So the largest percentage here was at 1 to 9.99 billion, 22%. But again, it really kind of is a pretty good varied group from lots of different sizes of organizations. Okay, so why did we do this report? Well, I think anybody could say demand is rising for business analytics, and to provide what we mean by that is sort of an evolving definition, so I think I'll be talking about it throughout the report, but basically we're talking about trying to go beyond the simple reports and dashboards where users really want more data interaction. They want to do different types of analytics. They may want to look for predictive insights. They want to do different types of data visualization. They may want to include search in their capabilities, so not just query and reporting. So a lot of these things, and then of course now we're getting into the contribution of AI, which I'll be talking about in this report as well. So going beyond what really constituted a very simple BI maybe back in the day. And so that's really, we're seeing demand rising for all of this and users wanting to do more with data and do it more often. So it applies to more and more of their decisions. And organizations, I think, are having this expectation. This is where we get the idea of a data-driven organization or analytics-driven organization. So demand is clearly rising for using data to learn the other questions, the why is this happening, how, what's going on. So more depth, more context around, say, transactions or events that organizations are seeing, and what's likely to happen in the future. So that's the predictive side. Analytics changes the interaction with data. So obviously you can't go anywhere with business analytics unless you have good data, and so that's something fundamental to the report that we've done in my presentation here. And but analytics, the practice has changed, and so this is something organizations are, of course, having to get used to and figure out how to address. Is if you go beyond those kind of simple reports and dashboards, the static BI reporting is kind of predefined and so forth. What does that mean for the data infrastructure, and what kind of data do we need to have? So often more access to more diverse data sources, lots of different types of data, and more frequent and intensive data interaction. So in a lot of organizations, the very heavy analytics might take place in off hours and done in batch, and so as not to interfere with other systems. But now organizations are moving to where analytics are so important that they need to do it more frequently than that and be able to handle that. So that's another thing that's really generating a lot of change in data management. So our research focus, again, how can organizations evolve from the more simple BI to business analytics, and then what are some of the pain points and how can they be addressed? A lot of organizations do, of course, evolve from BI data warehousing as the starting point, unless, of course, they're starting with spreadsheets, and there's a lot of that out there, too. We certainly see in our research that lots of organizations are still operating with spreadsheets. But as they move to business intelligence, and that maybe a more simple idea of it, that's often the starting point. So what are we talking about there? It's practices and technologies that enable people to understand data and be informed about changes. So it's pretty simple in a definition, but of course there's a lot behind that because we're talking about reporting and analytics and queries and so forth. But one thing I think is interesting, and often and important to remember about business analytics is the business part, that BI is mostly meant to facilitate decisions, actionable insights for business decisions and processes. So how do you apply this knowledge that we're getting from the data to something we're really trying to decide or have a strategy to deal with or improve something in the organization, so do performance management, things like that. And so it tends to be pragmatic, practical, whereas analytics has often been, there's certainly that, but there's also the idea of let's just speculate, let's look in the data, let the data speak for itself, learn some things we didn't know about the data. So business analytics is bringing together, in some ways, these worlds where the more pragmatic, what do we need to, how can we learn more about from the data to make this daily decision with a little bit more of a speculative understanding and trying to help the two serve each other. The data integration and data warehousing, scale and speed enable faster updates for more data. Well, that's been the progression for those technologies in that area with data integration and data warehousing. Certainly what we started with was very slow, and I think most organizations would say it's still a long process in many cases to get the ETL together, to integrate the data, to blend the data, to build the data warehouse. All of these things can still take time, even as they move into the cloud. But no doubt, they've become faster over time, and there's technologies keep pushing it to get faster and faster and give organizations more options. Again, to support operational, not just strategic kind of decisions that aren't as time sensitive. But the BI data warehousing world can be a strength, can be a weakness, as I put here, is that to get to that level of quality of the data and the formalized understanding of the data in a data warehouse and with most traditional BI systems, that can also be a weakness because it can leave a lot of data out, leave a lot of activities on the side. And of course, it always happens that the users want to do those things. They want to do different things with the data. They're not happy with just to manage reports or something like that, so they want to get to different sets of data. Those are kind of some of the things that are driving this progression towards more of a business analytics approach. Talking about analytics itself just a little bit, certainly the number one thing that we see in our research that organizations are trying to do with analytics is get predictive insights, because predictive insights are powerful. And of course, the more accurate they are, the more powerful they can be. So you don't want inaccurate predictions. They want them to be as accurate, and that's where, of course, good data and good governance, good practices come into the play. Organizations want to develop and apply predictive analytics to answer business questions. So remember, as I mentioned before, that kind of pragmatic idea of business intelligence. Well, now let's get a predictive understanding under that tent to make that part of what users have to work with there to make decisions, to get kind of a predictive insight. A lot of organizations, of course, have been doing forecasting for a long time. Predictive insights allowing more depth in the data, more data mining of larger sets of data, be able to ask more variables than are typical with typical forecasting. So lots of more kinds of inquiries can happen and see unexpected trends and patterns in the data that may have come up in the course of a forecasting kind of operation. AI and machine learning development. This is, of course, what's happening in analytics. So the big thing is tapping more and bigger, diverse sets, being able to automate, use machine learning effectively, get beyond that even to deep learning and so forth. So this is what's often driving going into the cloud, because there's a need for elastic and scalable storage and computation power to handle the kind of things that are going on with AI and machine learning in particular, and with predictive modeling and so forth. So analytics is really pushing organizations to have more scalability and more elasticity there around the power and also cost. And then all of this is starting to democratize. So data scientists in organizations, data engineers that are devoted to analytics will always be pushing the envelope and doing innovations there, and are badly needed by organizations. You just have to look and see how hard it is and how important it is for organizations to hire data scientists and data engineers. But at the same time, organizations are certainly trying to push as much as they can out, at least many are, as we'll see in our research, to democratize analytics so that data-savvy users who are maybe working with self-service tools on the BI and analytics side, now they want to incorporate these more advanced things and become what the industry is calling citizen data scientists or citizen data professionals, basically data-savvy users who can want to do more self-service, predictive analytics, want to be able to locate and access the data. So this is where data catalogs are so important. We'll be talking about that as we go along. Be able to access data quickly. So again, virtualization being an option instead of just collecting and centralizing data. All these things starting coming more into play for as more users try to push the envelope in terms of what they can do with BI. Data preparation, data pipeline development also going along with that too to supply the analytics with the data. So just to summarize some of the innovations that we're seeing here, and I write about this a little more detail in the report itself, is just a few things that are driving. So AI augmentation and user recommendations and notifications. So this is something that we're seeing a lot of the tool providers and service providers out there doing. It's really exciting and interesting stuff to augment what users can do by providing recommendations based on maybe predictive analytics or some other form of analytics for what the data sets they might want to look at, what visualizations they might want to look at, lots of different things like that to help them along the way so that the software is not just a passive instrument, but really something that's active and helping the user. Prescriptive analytics, that kind of comes along with that recommendations idea, but more broadly, moving beyond just predictive. Okay, we've got the prediction, but what does that tell us to do? What are some recommendations? And that can now start to be surfaced through analytics and provided to humans, or of course provided to automated decisioning systems that are working. And so certainly a lot of innovation going on right now in many organizations around developing prescriptive analytics and then based on predictions and using that to help human decision makers and also automated systems. Self-service is continuing to advance, so more and more intuitive and personalization kind of interfaces. AI and automation for data catalogs and metadata repositories. We talk about this a lot in the report. And, not to get ahead of myself, but one of the drawbacks of those systems is often they require a lot of manual work, and AI and automation is going to be very helpful there. Data quality and governance. I mean, of course, the more data people are using, the more stress that puts on the processes for data quality and ensuring data governance. So those become critical. And scalability and elastic data management, of course, as we've been talking about. Okay, the first research chart of the report. So this one we asked just a big question, really. Which of the following steps would be most important right now to improve your organization's success with BI and analytics and increase the value it gains from data assets? So just broadly, wanted to kind of pull all of it onto one chart and see where things stack up. And we can see here that 2/3, 66%, want to improve data quality and trust. So we saw in the previous slide that innovations are necessary to help organizations improve those areas, and that's going to hit a definite need that organizations have. At least broadly, we see here that 2/3 want to do this. And then we kind of move down the list. We can see empower more users with self-service functionality, 53%. So that still is a very important goal in organizations to get to self-service. Improve data integration, single integrated views of data, getting all that data together and integrating it, 51%. The same percentage saying establish a data catalog and metadata management. We can see how important that is to, broadly among those respondents in this survey. Increased user training, governance is very important, 36%, and so we can sort of move down the list. I won't mention every item on the list, but this gives kind of a sense of where things kind of stack up in terms of what's important. The missing ingredient in moving forward, for many cases, is the difficulty in data literacy. And this has definitely been a topic that a lot of people in the industry and organizations have been talking about. We've done webinars at TDWI that have been very well attended around the topic of data literacy to help users understand data visualization and analytics so they can use them effectively to interact with and share them with others to achieve results. And I just said, I think there's a good chart here from Nate Angel that I happen to find on the internet that shows that data literacy kind of fits with other kinds of literacies that are important, including statistical literacy, information literacy, technology, critical reasoning. So this is a component of a larger area of kind of literacy that's very important to understand information broadly. Of course, now here we're talking about really data literacy. And also I put up here, it kind of reminded me of this discussion of a book I read a while ago by John Allen Paulos, really a perceptive author around the idea of innumeracy, and that broadly people struggling, and certainly today, with statistics and numbers thrown around constantly in the news, it can be dizzying and difficult to understand and know whether you can even trust it. And this gets into the issue of the innumeracy, the inability to deal comfortably with fundamental notions of numbers and chance plagues far too many otherwise knowledgeable citizens. And I think, being humble about it myself, I think that's true. That I'm not sure I always understand when I'm reading the papers, and I'm sure that others feel the same way. So, anyway, so this is all an area that organizations really need to be devoting a lot of attention just to help their people in the organization do a better job of understanding the data. And then the other component around understanding is also understanding accountability and responsibility for that data, and that's where we get into the importance of governance. So we looked at data literacy a little more deeply this time to see what kind of steps for improvement that organizations see as important. So what steps are most important to take to improve data literacy for its executives, managers, and frontline personnel? Top is definitely to increase training to improve data literacy. So again, are almost two-thirds, 65% saying that's important. Culture is really critical, and I think a lot of organizations kind of run into this problem that there's not a good acceptance of data curiosity, critical thinking, that can hold back data literacy, at least making it feel like it's important in the organization. And so we see here 62% saying that supporting that culture is important. Make it easier for users to access, explore, and interact with data. So the fundamental things that just to work with the data, 62% makes a lot of sense there. Improve data quality. So again, quality critical. So users can trust the data, 53%. And so, moving on down, there's lots of other elements that really all those on this list are important. I think, again, this is an exercise of seeing which ones rise to the top most commonly among organizations, but certainly even getting down to the lower levels, ensuring that no employees are left behind in steps to improve data literacy. So that's very important to make sure everyone is as literate as they need to be to do their jobs in the organization, be responsible for the data and so forth, and be able to move ahead and become more literate and take on more kind of tasks that are more data-driven. So I think that we can see here a lot of everything's important on this list, but we can sort of see where organizations are looking right now. Okay, so I'm going to move into some more research. This section is around, as I mentioned, technology selection, funding, and management. I thought it would be important to look at this as we think about business being more involved in the decision-making around technology selection, funding, and management, since it's so important to their daily decisions. So here, just off the top, 54% anticipate that the business size role will increase over the next 12 months. So that's very interesting. That certainly technology selection, funding, and management is no longer just IT. It really is business and IT working together. And that's really what we can see in this slide here. We asked, and this is showing two things here. One is all respondents, and then the other is respondents that select group I mentioned before, those who see the business side role increasing, that 54%. And so we can just kind of get a sense of, comparatively all responses versus that select group, what they see. It's pretty similar, but shading a little bit more towards seeing the question here we asked, what percentage of cloud-based platforms and software-as-a-service solutions that your organization uses for BI analytics supporting data integration management or selected funding managed primarily by business functions themselves rather than IT? So here we were asking really about progression to the cloud and SaaS kind of solutions, and we can see just again a slightly more who see business the side role increasing, more. So so interesting there. And of course, this question is really around cloud platforms and software as a service, which is where we're seeing, of course, intensive growth in this area, and particularly driven by higher business side activity or role in the selection, funding, and management of technologies. So we also drilled down a little bit into each of these different areas, and so I've kind of really shortened it up here. There's a lot more detail in the report about where we see each kind of group having more responsibilities. So identifying needs, this is where the business side has the biggest role. Line of business leads in this phase, and just identifying what the needs are, and that certainly makes a lot of sense because those are the people who are closest to the needs in the organization and are able to identify it more carefully and more accurately. But this is, a progression because a lot of this used to be done through requirements definition from IT, and certainly IT is often still involved at this point. And we actually, in our research, we do see that IT is not, it's not like they're not involved, but not as much as business functions. Allocating budget, then it rises to the C-level executives, and that C-level in both the CEO, CFO, CMO, Chief Operating Officer, and so forth are heavily involved, but also the CIO and CTO and CSO, those higher level IT executives involved in allocating budget. Then in selecting the technologies and services moves to the importance of the VP or directors of BI analytics and data platforms have the highest level of involvement. So again, here we're starting to get more technology understanding. Makes a lot of sense there. You'd want these people involved, so this should not be just a C-level, or just a business person decision. You need to get people who are expert, have been around the block a little bit, have seen how these things work, involved at that point. Purchase approval, then it rises back up to the C-level. So this is where the importance of being able to make the argument, make the case, and for getting new technology is so important to be able to make that case to the C-level executive because they, after all, are going to approve the purchase or not. And then getting to deployment and maintenance, data engineers and architects have the highest level of involvement there. So getting back into where you have the specialists, those who are most experienced in deployment and maintenance involved at that stage. So I thought this is interesting to look at and think about as we go forward. And we will go forward here. So we're talking about now usage patterns and selection of analytics tools and services. Question we wanted to ask right off the top was just about the penetrations. I think everyone's always interested to know how many people in organizations are using the BI kind of related tools. So here we asked approximately what percentage of individuals in your organization are using dedicated tools or cloud-based services designed specifically for BI, OLAP, online analytical processing, advanced search, and or visual discovery and analytics, so that whole bucket of technologies around business analytics. And about a third, say 41% or more in their organizations have dedicated tools and services. So that's definitely greater than what we've seen in our own TDWI research previously. So it definitely is expanding, probably not at the rate that maybe some thought it might, but I think that shows, considering I think even maybe 3 years ago it was around the 28% or less than 30%. So this is an expansion that we're seeing, and so more users in organizations are using these dedicated tools. Who is making the most use of them? We have some other details in the research report about this, with 70% say business analysts, so still dominated by the traditional users of these technologies, but 52% are line of business and or departmental managers, so pretty good penetration there among business users, and then 26% of frontline personnel, so that's higher as well from previous surveys we've done. Well, actually, here we can see some of the percentage comparatively in 2014 when we asked the similar question. So I think that clearly more users in organizations are using more powerful business intelligence and business analytics tools. looking more closely now at what they can do and what they can do now and what they would like to be doing in the future. Again, this question is a little bit of a detailed question again. Which of the following activities are people in your organization currently doing in a self-service fashion with limited or no IT intervention? So that's kind of the definition of self-service we're using. Using on-premises, web-based, cloud-based tools and platforms. And then if not currently, which ones would users like self-service capabilities in the future? So I think this kind of gives a pretty good understanding of where organizations are and what are the priorities for the future. And one thing you can see right here is that almost everyone has got a pretty good percentage in terms of would like self-service in the near future. So self-service, as we saw before, is still a very strong trend in organizations, something that users want, a lot of organizations would like to provide to users. So we see here that 50% are able to currently have self-service reporting. So that's a pretty big number. Ad hoc on-the-fly querying, so often it's kind of the companion to managed reporting to be able to do on ad hoc querying. 44% have that now, although 41% would like it in the near future. Dashboard personalization, and this is an interesting area because often you can have managed reporting but also dashboard personalization, so it doesn't necessarily have to be completely self-service, and that is often the case in many organizations. In any case, we have 38% currently having it, but 47% would like more. So the strong near future interest areas are dashboard personalization, but even search, we can see here 48%, a little bit further down about the middle of the chart, 48% of search across data and reports. That's something that respondents would like to have in the near future. Data discovery, so increased data discovery and exploration. A lot of the self-service tools came to market with greater ability to do data discovery and exploration than they could with traditional BI tools. And so we see here that 34% are able to do it now, 47% would like to do it in the future. And then mobile access. It's interesting. 44% would like more mobile access. This is often kind of, you can see here 24% currently have self-service. So this is an area where organizations are beginning to push on, or users rather, are beginning to push more on their organizations to provide more business analytics capabilities through mobile devices. And I wouldn't be surprised if with the remote workforce we have now, that's part of the reason for the push. So let's look at further at user satisfaction and upgrade priorities. So before we saw what they're using and what they would like to use, now we can look at some of the issues around satisfaction. And the highest very satisfactory percentages around concurrency and expanding the number of users. So this appears to be an area where organizations have been pretty successful in the kind of expansion. They can serve more users. And this also could go along with the idea that managed reporting and enterprise reporting, that's often what is, one of the best things about that is that you can spread it out to more users, provide more dashboards. But then, of course, there's frustration that can set in that maybe the dashboards or the analytics capabilities in that is not enough, and so more pursuit of self-service personalization and more functionality in a self-service fashion. So let's take a look a little bit further. So satisfaction levels are highest around concurrency, data security or authorization, data loading and movement, although we can see here that the somewhat satisfied needs improvement is quite a bit higher than just very satisfied now. So I think most organizations that we surveyed here see certainly room for improvement. But taken together, we can see that there's quite a bit of satisfaction all the way down the list here. Data virtualization, for example, 48% are either very or somewhat satisfied. So there's been good progress made there. The lowest, though, is with current data catalog and metadata and semantic layer, which is interesting because we do see in our research that that's at the top of the list. We'll see later in terms of what organizations would like to have better capabilities around that area. So they see it as an area where there's a lot of need, and you can see here 48% saying needing a major upgrade there. In some other areas, we're looking for major upgrades, governance and lineage tracking. 43% saying need a major upgrade. So we can see here, it's interesting, the different areas. Now, a lot of these areas, the upgrades are going to come through using, we're going to see AI, machine learning, more automation to accelerate this analytics and the capabilities here. And so this is an important area progress in the industry. You probably don't need to, that's not news to anyone here. So intelligence-driven AI techniques such as machine learning and natural language processing are driving innovation in business analytics. Organizations, of course, want to do more than just provide for humans, but also, well, it is still for humans when it's embedded, but I guess I'm saying instead of using direct use of a tool, to have it embedded in front-end solutions, in data integration middleware, in data platforms, in applications, and so forth. So taking that AI capability and embedding it is a very important trend. And all of this reducing the need for hand coding and manual work. So this is the kind of stuff that's going to be applied to helpfully upgrade the things we saw on the previous chart. AI and automation, vital to accelerating data and analytics cycles to realize value sooner. I think most organizations see it that way, that they want to apply it to get to the business value out of the data much sooner. So kind of reduce the length of all these cycles that it takes to get the data prepared, move it into analytics, even doing the steps, the processes in analytics. So this includes, as we will see in our research, including AI/ML to accelerate AI/ML itself. So that's also a very important trend in terms of automated model management, feature engineering recommendations. So a lot of these things kind of coming into for accelerating analytics itself. So thinking about this and then some of the satisfaction priorities that we saw before, what are some of the priorities we saw in, or which of the following ways will AI, machine learning, and automation be applied to augment BI and analytics? So we kind of drilled down a little bit closer into this question. And we can see right off the top that, as I mentioned before, a lot of the desire to apply this stuff to daily decision making. And so 68% want to see dashboards and KPIs integrated with AI-driven insights. So those recommendations, the unearthing, the surfacing of trends, the discovery and exploration of the data, kind of automating that process using AI effectively so that can be brought to the attention. So it's not just looking at a metric, but now you can begin to explore and expand and have a lot of that work done for you, so you don't have to take as much time. 42%. Well, let me just go down the list here. Automated discovery of actionable insights. This is something that we saw at the top of the list the last time we asked this question. So again, this remains 62%, very important. This kind of goes along with the automated discovery of the insights. Forecasting, aided by predictive modeling and AI machine learning, 60%. As I mentioned before, a lot of organizations have a lot of experience with forecasting and would like to add predictive modeling to that. More intuitive and personalized user experiences, 42%. So again, going along with that idea of integrating the recommendations in there and providing those recommendations, 37% want AI-powered recommendations for finding, selecting, and using data. And then we can see the other things down the list. 29% want natural language for data storytelling and annotation. This is also an important direction in BI and analytics, is to provide those capabilities. And to do it effectively, the tools really need to allow for natural language kind of queries, collaborative, and we can see down the list is interesting. Conversational user interfaces, that was sort of a big trend in the industry for a little while. There are only 12% are asking for it here, but the idea of being able to using an Alexa or Siri, be careful to say that, my cell phone is here, but I don't want to wake it up, to have natural language capabilities to interface with those kinds of devices. Yeah, so I think there's others on the list you might want to look at to see how they compare in your organization. Okay, well, I think this is a good point to take a poll question and see what our audience is thinking. So here we ask, what is your biggest challenge in delivering more business value with BI and analytics? Is it the area around data literacy that I mentioned that needs improvement, just to improve the skill level of users to understand the data and be able to work with visualizations and share it? Our tools and data platforms are older and require too much manual development and administration, so looking for automation there. Selection and acquisition of new technology and services is slow and not well formalized, so that process I mentioned before, whereas maybe it's too disorganized in organizations. Problems in enabling self-service for more users, so not getting enough self-service, and integration data management challenges, and then finally data governance and data quality challenges. Okay, we'll give it a second to see how the results come out. Okay, the results. almost a quarter, 23% saying data literacy needs improvement. Yeah, I think that jives with other research we've done at TDWI. And 13% around that saying that tools and data platforms are older, looking for automation there. Just 3% saying that their technology acquisition processes are slow and not well formalized. So that seems to be not really a pain point in our audience today. 13% want to enable more self-service. 10% data integration management challenges are top. But then here, okay, the biggest one, governance and data quality. And of course, putting those two together is two big areas together. So I suppose if we split those apart, it might be interesting. But they often do and should go together, is to improve data quality, to improve the data trust, and then, of course, governance issues that are related to that, as well as regulatory adherence. So that's the top one. Okay, let's proceed on with the research view today. And so here we're going to look at data integration, preparation, catalogs, and virtualization. So kind of the data stack issues, whereas previously looking more at analytics and self-service personalization and so forth. We'll start at data preparation because it's kind of the big one, the big process. It's really the whole thing from ingesting, collecting data for sources, then going through the profiling, validation, cleansing, transformation steps, and then enriching it and bringing it finally to a usable state. And so these can obviously vary depending on the use case. Some cases are not a lot needs to be done. Want to look at raw data, like here I mentioned data pipelines, which we group together with data preparation. Might be just wanting to stream raw data for analytics and AI machine learning. So not a lot done. Just get the data there as fast as possible in real time. But other data pipelines and data preparation processes involve, of course, extensive data quality cleansing, data transformation, then enriching it maybe with other data to make sure it's what the users are really looking for there. And of course, this is always something that users need to tinker with, which is something that is often an issue, is not being able to go back and forth between data preparation processes and the analytics and visualizations themselves. So that's an important trend in the industry, is try to integrate those more effectively. So the challenge is users are spending too much time on data preparation. Often it can be repetitive, it can be inconsistent, and this is particularly true as business users often take on things. They might sort of start data preparation process and get to a certain point and say, well, it's good enough, I got to meet a deadline here. Or they've done enough, for their particular use case, but not in a more broad way. So there's a lot of inconsistency that can happen there. Too much manual work, which can slow things down, so not enough automation. Difficulty locating the data and resolving definitional conflicts. And this kind of lends an idea to technologies such as data cataloging and data virtualization to make it easier to just get to the data, to access the data, and then, of course, with catalogs to be able to locate the data and resolve definitional conflicts. And then too much dependence on IT. So you're just kind of part of the IT backlog often with data preparation, just waiting for IT to be able to deal with it. So the big mission is really to accelerate data preparation and reduce friction, the path of the data as it gets to that usable state for business analytics. Looking at some statistics here, we asked how far things are going with self-service in organizations, and we can see here that, we ask what can users do in a self-service fashion. So moving and replicating data into spreadsheets, not surprisingly, is the top of the list. And then blending, consolidate, join, and linking records. So almost half are able now to do this in a self-service fashion. And I think this is, you can see the influence of tools in the market that are capable of, allowing users to do that kind of activity. As they move into more difficult and larger data sets, it becomes harder. Create calculated fields, dimensions, and aggregations. So doing the kind of BI and OLAP functionality, 47% able to do this in a self-service fashion. So that's good, not having to go to IT for all of that. Share, reuse, and collaborate on curated data sets. So being able to not only blend, consolidate, and join, but also begin to share with colleagues the curated data sets. 40% able to do that in a self-service fashion. And then 32% can enrich, refine, and extrapolate their raw data. So we can sort of see what can be done, what is less common, entity resolution and standardization, transformation, or transform and blend the data from data lakes and storage. So these are areas where not as many that you have to lend it to experts, to IT, to data-savvy people who can take on these activities. So this is interesting to see, again, where self-service stands with data preparation. One of the things that can help is virtualization, because it can basically not, as I have at the bottom, it enables reduction in data movement. That's probably one of the number one things. Basically, a layer that can connect to sources, accesses metadata. Data virtualization layers use metadata extensively, enables transformations in the layer, joins, and so forth, to make it easier to get to these without having to actually move and collect the data in one place. It's a logical source of the data rather than a physical. So it shields users from complexity and single views of trusted data. So this is an option that can be helpful, often alongside data warehousing and so forth. And it basically puts more tools in the tool set to work with the data and provide users with faster access and maybe get around some of the slow areas of the data preparation cycles. And then another important technology is data cataloging. So data catalogs, data about the data, gathering metadata, gathering definitions about the data, making it easier to find the data, to locate the data, understand where it came from and how it got into the organization, how different data elements are related. And it's important. Data catalogs can be important certainly at the enterprise level, and some organizations do have enterprise data catalogs that are associated with BI platforms. But data catalogs are obviously important at all levels for departments that want to pull together data definitions and metadata about their applications, their JSON sources, for example, other kinds of data sources. Maybe they're beginning to expand into the cloud. Although some organizations are also developing, they have data catalogs for teams, so project teams. For data platforms, they might have them for just one cloud source or one data source. And then, as I mentioned, enterprise. Of course, the ultimate would be to have one catalog that rules them all. And some organizations are trying to get to that point to be able to integrate the catalogs that are being used by departments, teams, or on data platforms, and be able to integrate that into an enterprise catalog function as sort of a fabric kind of approach. 51% say establishing a catalog is one of the most important steps to take in improving BI and analytics success. So you can see the importance of it there, and particularly to handle governance kind of things like data lineage to improve visibility into the data lifecycle. So some of the top priorities that we see here, we can see making it easier for users to search for and find data. So 75%, that's at the very top of the list. 57% want to improve governance, security, and regulatory adherence. So we see a definite role there. I think a lot of organizations are really acknowledging the importance of a catalog to governance, security, and actually even the previously I mentioned data virtualization for allowing that layer to provide the protection for security and authentication that can be helpful there. And sort of other things, inventorying data lists, that's very important for regulatory. Coordinating meaning across sources, so many organizations are trying to move beyond just data definitions to coordinating more semantic meaning around the data. Supporting master data management, 37%, again, so those higher level like customer definitions and so forth, be able to integrate the data catalog definitions with that. And then I mentioned here 40% wanted to use it for data prep and data pipelines, so you can see the importance of that. All right, so let's talk about governance, which we can see is very important, governance, data trust, and also just sort of throwing in business analytics in the cloud because the poor thing didn't have a home of its own, so this is going to be covered in this section as well, which obviously is a critical direction. So governance challenges. What is it? Defining rules and policies for protecting and securing sensitive data. 45% saying this is one of their biggest challenges. It's often the number one mission right now in terms of governance, and 45% saying it's also their biggest challenge. And so that shows, how important it is, and also how big a challenge it can be. And particularly as data grows, data becomes more diverse, more distributed, maybe across different platforms, on premises and in the cloud. This can all drive up the costs of governance. And we can see having organizations look for AI, automation, things they can begin to modernize their governance approach and the technology used for governance to reduce costs and make it simpler and faster. It also involves monitoring data use to ensure the rules are followed when collected, moved, copied, analyzed, and shared. So again, this could be a role for AI and automation as well to improve and automate some of that monitoring. Key role for data catalogs, 43%, as we saw before. want to improve governance by establishing a data catalog. So that was pretty close to the same percentage we saw earlier around the importance of a catalog for governance. So around 43%. And then 10% saying they're very confident, or rather only 10% saying they're very confident in their use of metadata for governance. This is clearly an area where there's importance to improve and modernize. Self-service is a challenge for governance. Self-service data governance, so 52% saying increased self-service is a governance challenge. 43% like lack of data use visibility, so often that comes with self-service, is the organization doesn't have visibility into what's going on with the data, how it's being shared, how it's being transformed, and so forth. So these are challenges in governance. 23% having trouble controlling access and authentication. As I mentioned, that could be a role for the data virtualization to manage that activity. Let's look at how organizations can improve data trust. Now this is what we asked, what are the following actions being undertaken right now? And monitoring data quality is at the top of the list, 63%, so almost two-thirds there. Facilitate data stewardship and mentoring. So this is a very important area too, to identify people in the business and IT sides who can steward users to the right sources of data, trusted sources of data, higher quality sources of data, or at least know the quality of the data sources they're working with, whether it could be poor or not verified data, not validated data, and so forth. And then mentoring users. So that's a very important activity and can be critical to both governance and data trust. Validating new data sources, standardizing data policies, standards and procedures, 46%. Training, very important, 45%. Using governance to increase users' confidence in the data. I think I mentioned that in the previous slide, so you can see the relationship between data trust and governance there. And so other things down the list. As mentioned, lineages before. At the bottom, only 20% documenting data provenance, that is, changes to data over time. That's becoming important to governance and to some cases regulatory adherence. Expansion into the cloud. Okay, so I tacked this in here into this section. So cloud obviously is a key trend, and so we want to get a sense of where this stands. And so here we asked what organizations can do in the cloud right now, in cloud-based or SaaS platforms. Enterprise BI reporting dashboards, so 54%, that's interesting. And I think it does point out the cloud is becoming a key factor, considering these are real enterprise systems. Now, 54% running in the cloud. Business-driven self-service BI and analytics in the cloud, 51%. So we've got another real movement of that kind of software into the cloud, and organizations heading in that direction with it. 41% have data warehouses in the cloud. 39% have data lakes in the cloud. So we see the major data management systems, a lot of organizations either, if not moving and moving their systems, at least augmenting on-premises systems with cloud-based systems. And 38% also doing similar with data transformation and preparation. So again, this might be one where you can kind of line it up with your organization as to where you are with the cloud and see comparatively. Some of the challenges in the cloud. The top one is managing costs. And so this is interesting because a lot of organizations went to the cloud, one of their first priorities was to save costs. Well, now they're having trouble managing costs. And so this is where automation is important, having better data visibility, better understanding of data preparation cycles so you can find where there are bottlenecks in areas of higher costs than they need to be. So getting a better understanding of the data is critical there. 47% data security, identity management, access authentication and regulatory compliance, kind of those two kind of coming together there. And we can sort of see some of the other challenges on the list. Data loading, around 38%, same with integrating on-premises and cloud-based data. We definitely see this as a concern in organizations that it's too difficult for users to get a complete view of the data, a single view of the data when it's spread across on-premises and cloud. And so moving down the list here, 19% saying no unified data fabric that can enable virtual management. We see this as a coming area going forward. And now we could just one last research slide we can look at here. Where AI and machine learning is going to have an impact on the data stack. So before we ask more about the front end kind of analytics, this is more around the data activities. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can see here that the top three areas where upgrades are looked at or desired involving AI and machine learning: data catalogs, governance, and metadata discovery. So I think that we've our research is really bringing that out. This is an area where organizations want to modernize and they would like to see use of AI and machine learning. And it can be helpful in a lot of other categories that are related on this chart as well. So this one I think I'll leave for everyone to look at on their own. Okay, I want to make sure I have time for questions, so let's go through some closing recommendations very briefly here. So kind of wrapping it up, take steps to improve data literacy. So often it's that human level that can hold organizations back from getting more value from business analytics. Develop skills for articulating value of business analytics to C-level executives. So we saw that they still have the authority when it comes to improving technology and service purchases. So being able to articulate the value is very important there, and having someone on your team who can do that, the project teams. Don't stand pat with self-service analytics and visualization. We still see a lot of holes in those areas that users would like filled in terms of modernization and better performance and functionality. Focus AI augmentation on areas that provide tangible benefits. So we saw the chart I had at the top of the list, wanting it for KPIs, metrics, dashboards. You can see that people want to use this for daily decision making. Improve data preparation and pipeline development to increase self-service. As you mentioned, that's where often a lot of the delays are. Align data integration and virtualization options with the right use cases. So expanding that tool set so you can apply whether data collection into a data warehouse or virtualization makes sense, or into a data lake. Improve data catalogs, glossaries, and metadata repositories. We've seen that throughout the report. Address data governance, another key issue. And then take steps to improve data quality and trust. So those are the recommendations, and again, there's a little more detail about them in the written report. Thank you very much, and I think we have one more poll question before we get to the audience Q&A. This is looking forward. What is your top priority in the next 12 months regarding business analytics? Improving user experiences such as more self-service, providing embedded AI-based recommendations, so that front-end kind of user experience. Expand citizen data science and predictive analytics, so making more deeper predictive analytics in particular available to more business-savvy users or data-savvy users. Modernize data collection, integration, virtualization strategies, so that making good decisions around that. Improving data catalog, business glossary, metadata management. Modernizing data management itself, so increasing AI automation, maybe expanding so for data warehouse and data lakes into the cloud. And then improving governance and data quality. I think I have a feeling what's going to be number one. Well, maybe I was wrong. Well, now we're about, let's see, so 50% saying improve the user experiences. So that's interesting. So improve what the user experience is in terms of personalization and so forth. And then we do see 50% saying data catalog, business glossary, and metadata. So those are the two real top areas going forward for organizations in the next 12 months. Okay, Jim, back to you for audience questions.
Hi, Dave. Thanks. Here's our first question. We're moving our data warehouse and data lake to the cloud to take advantage of cost elasticity. However, this is a massive project to move all the data there. Are there alternatives that could get users the data they need sooner?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We do see a lot of organizations at that point. And I think it is a time where organizations can look and see, could, say, virtualization be an option, just providing a logical layer that provide access to lots of different sources so that that could reduce some of the pressure on the movement. For some projects and for some data needs, you're obviously going to need to centralize that data. Often for governance, organizations are looking to centralize maybe certain customer data they need to protect for governance reasons. Of course, governance is also requiring organizations to keep data in certain locations regionally, so that's also making it important to have that kind of data fabric approach layer where they can begin to govern and manage data across different platforms. And so, yeah, I think that the move to the cloud is the time for organizations to take a step back and take a look at what is the right approach for what they're trying to do, rather than just take the idea of lift and shift, to move it all into the cloud.
Okay, here's our next question from an audience member. With data stewardship, what's your recommendation on the best place to start?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because I think that organizations are trying to figure out how to identify data stewards. And I think it is important to have it both from business and IT. Originally, I think a lot of them did come from IT because that's where the expertise was. But part of data stewardship, of course, is knowing what is the business use case and what is the business context and what is the user really trying to do with the data. And so there, I think it's good to identify data-savvy business users, power users, or often how they're described in organizations, and try to get some of their time to steward, to mentor other users. And of course, other things are being brought into data stewardship, and that is often around governance and data quality, and having them be the ones who are overseeing regulatory adherence and making sure that quality is improving, that the users of data understand their responsibilities and accountabilities. I mentioned that's part of data literacy. And so stewards are playing a role there. So in some organizations, we're starting to see a more formalized an actual title of a data steward, sometimes reporting into a chief data officer who often is kind of overseeing this kind of process. So it could be that as organizations going forward, it becomes more of an actual job description and responsibility rather than just someone who's assigned that. But I think it is important to look at both business and IT to find good data stewards.
In this next question, let's look closer at self-service. How do you define what tools are considered self-service tools versus those that aren't self-service that only a developer should be using?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think we've been using this self-service term endlessly in this industry for many years, and I think it's a moving thing. It's not always going to be the same, and so self-service is basically what users can do without IT intervention or very little IT intervention, and so because that's the way the use of the technology has been evolving. Originally, it was heavy IT intervention and very little that users could do on their own. Maybe they could do some visualization filtering and things like that to just look at particular sets of data and that kind of thing, or maybe choose among a small set of visualizations. Well, of course, now with tools, users have many visualizations they can choose, and now we're having more selection capabilities around the data sources, data sets they want to use, what they want done with the data in terms of preparation cycles. And so all this is becoming more part of self-service, so it's evolving in a more self-service direction. So pure self-service, I guess, is where the user can just sit down and start working on this and really not need to interact with IT developers or IT administrators. But of course, as projects get bigger, there's bigger data sets, you're going to want to work with the data experts, the IT experts, the data VP, the business intelligence and data platform experts, and so forth. So self-service isn't really about ignoring that expertise. You want to have a good relationship with those people, but it is certainly about an evolution in the direction of more that the user can do on their own.
Our last question has to do with a eternal problem, and that's money. We could use a data catalog, but we have trouble getting funding for projects that do not seem directly related to a business need. How can we make a better argument to upper management?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's something that's been a problem for a long time, whether it be data catalogs, master data management, anything that often is sort of cross-functional in organizations. And, I think two things. One is the point that data catalogs can be valuable at a smaller level, too, at the departmental level, the business function level, and that kind of thing. So certainly not ignoring that and just think because you can't do an enterprise catalog, it's not worth it. It's definitely worth it to provide that kind of data definition, the understanding the relations between different pieces of data, and then, of course, addressing issues around governance. As we can see there, the strong relationship between developing a catalog and governance. But to back it up, I think that I think it's getting easier to demonstrate now that if you don't have a good handle on where the data is, how it's defined, it adds a lot of cost, and it can add a lot of time and delays and so forth. And those go right to the business value, the inability to deliver business value from BI and analytics kind of projects. So those are the kind of arguments that should be made to upper management around that. And then certainly, as we saw in the research, governance being important. Governance is a big, important concept to upper management, particularly around regulatory adherence and mentioned being a proper member of the kind of community of organizations, it's about reputation. In other words, that you want to have an organization that has a good reputation for how they manage data, particularly customer data. And so data catalogs can be very important to that process, to knowing where the data is, particularly customer data, knowing what's being done with that data, and then, of course, regulations such as the GDPR or initiatives in states such as California are requiring that. So those are issues I think that, if necessary, could be brought up.
Well, thanks, Dave, and thanks again to Elation, Denoto, and Win Enterprise by Grape City for sponsoring your original TDWI research. Remember that we recorded today's webinar and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues. And don't forget, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line. Finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. And with that, from both of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.